So I had been doing this work for nearly a decade as I documented the impact of war, and I was always driven by curiosity. And one of the things I felt that I was not seeing was what was happening to civilians in Afghanistan at the time. There was a lot of documentaries and TV about soldiers and fighting, but nothing about the civilians. So I went to Afghanistan, and yeah, I would say it was a really bad day at the office. I was on patrol with a group of American soldiers who got ambushed. As we ran for cover, I stepped on an improvised explosive device that was actually made of 2 anti-tank landmines. I lost both my legs, my arm was thrown in the air. I remember landing on my side, I was still conscious. I could see my legs to the tree above me. I remember thinking, well, this is going to be my last moment. I've seen people with far less injuries succumb to them in minutes. I remember thinking, well, I can sleep there for a minute. Just focus on your breathing, stay calm. You get through that, and I'll break. And do 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and miraculously, 45 minutes later, I'd be picked up by an American medevac crew who was in Kandahar. But if you indulge me for a minute, I can say what happened next. 3 days later, I regained my consciousness, and I'd been flown, I didn't know this, but I'd been flown to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. And I want you to imagine this moment. This is a moment that I share with many survivors. I woke up and I was in an intensive care unit, meaning the black lights are on, people rushing around, there's bleeps, there's noise. I knew what had happened. I remember losing my legs. I knew how badly I'd been injured, but I had no idea what country I was in now, or what state I was in, or how long I'd been unconscious. I did what any of us would want to do. I tried to scream out. But I soon realized I had tubes in my throat, in my mouth, my neck had the possibly into it, so I couldn't speak. I tried to move my right hand, but it was in a plaster cast because this hand was broken and then strapped to the side of the bed. I soon realized actually I was strapped to the bed and I couldn't move at all. I realized the only bodily function I had any control over was blinking. And for the next 46 days, that was the only way I could communicate with the world. It's what I call ultimate lockdown. In fact, it took nearly a day before anyone realized I was conscious. I was blinking and nobody realized. On 2 occasions, my family was called in to say goodbye. They weren't normally allowed into this room because I was so infected and so sick. But on 2 occasions, I would look up and I saw my sister and my brother say their goodbyes, and all I could do was blink. Now, I realized very quickly, if I was going to survive this, I needed to create a little universe in my mind. At first, it felt like being thrown in freezing cold ocean. My breath was taken away. I was in a panic. I wanted to scream. And I thought, Giles, I have no idea how long this will last, if I'll survive it. But if you're going to, you need to have some discipline, some mental discipline. So I created projects in my head. My favorite was called 100 Portraits Before I Die. A somewhat ironic name. But I mentioned 100 people I wish I'd done portraits of in my life. And I thought, I will picture myself doing that portrait. I'll meet the person. I'll work out what camera I'm using, whether I light it, the studio, location, black, white, color, digital film. And then I would see the end results and I'd critique it. And then next time, why don't you light it slightly differently? Now, you know what is incredible about the human mind? Is that I looked at how I worked as a photographer before my injury and afterwards. I completely changed the cameras, the technique. I went back to shooting off film. Even locked down in my own mind, I was able to change myself as an artist, as a creator. Because I believe while we have our imagination and our creativity, nothing can truly lock us down. 3 months after my injury, I was well enough to be moved out of the intensive care unit into a high dependency unit. And actually that's where things got really tough. Because now I was no longer fighting for my life. I was dealing with a new reality. I was told I would never walk again, never live independently. That said, I still couldn't feed myself. I remember they took me to have a shower for the first time. They put me in a wheelchair and took me, and it was the first time I saw myself in a mirror. And I was so shocked to see my missing limbs, the scars across my body, my missing arm. It was the moment it all hit me, the reality. They put me back to bed, and I'll be honest, I cried myself to sleep. And I remember thinking, I wish I'd just pass away in that helicopter in Afghanistan because I was not brave enough or strong enough to deal with this new reality. I didn't know what to live my life like this. But as you might remember, I'm notoriously stubborn, and something kicks in that night. And when I woke up the next day, I woke up with a mantra, a small saying that has stuck with me every day of my life since. Something that didn't just save me and help my recovery, but has affected every bit of work I do. I woke up the next day and I said to myself, from this moment on, I will never think about what I can't do. I will never focus on what I can't control. But I will focus on what I can, and I will excel at that. And to this day, I say to myself, I wake up and I look at everything, because most of us actually are focused on things we have no control over. Most of us are held back by issues that we can't change. Now, those things have to be in the periphery of our vision, and especially working at a place like the UN, where we're confronted with such global issues that we can't solve. But we have to ask ourselves each day, what can I focus on? Which bit of this can I control? What is it that I can do each day?
I mean, you must have realized that you had taken your lens for granted, so much about what you were able to do before. Did that also change you? I mean, how did you generate that will? I know you visit so many war zones and you meet so many people who've been injured and who've been forced to flee, and yet there is something that is quite common among all survivors, and that is this incredible inner will, this resilience.
I think resilience is a really interesting word. You know, people often think I connect with the people I photograph because of injuries, and maybe we're missing limbs, or we've gone through similar experience. And actually, I point out probably most of my work now is women in communities that have gone through other experiences, but not physical injury. And people are like, well, how do you connect with that? What's that story? And I always say it's that word, resilience. Resilience is a very misused word. I remember when COVID hit, I had various companies calling me saying, Giles, you're the most resilient person you know. Come and talk to the company. We need to be more resilient. Help us. Do an online talk. And I'd be like, no. They'd be like, no, we need it. You know, I said, well, you can't make yourself more resilient. They'd be like, no, when I heard a podcast and I saw a book. And I'd be like, bollocks. I believe resilience is life's gift for your suffering. Resilience is life's gift for those difficult times. And that is where I find my common bond. Because in the people I meet, there's some of the people here from the farms in Rwanda. I remember the first time I met them, they looked in my eyes and they said, you have suffering, but you're smiling. And that, to me, is what resilience is. It's every time the elasticity of the human condition is stretched, we become stronger. And that is what resilience is. It's the ability then to cope with greater trauma, but also, and more importantly, to celebrate life in a way that nobody else does. And so, strangely, I feel myself blessed to be part of that group, because as I travel the world and I meet people in very, very difficult circumstances, we laugh, we cry, we share a meal, and I'm still alive. And maybe that is the gift that I was given for what I went through.
Yeah, you might have seen that back to back with the exhibit that you put on here are two exhibits about the genocide against the Tutsi and Rwanda you just mentioned, that you've been there and met survivors there. Do you have a story that you can really remember that struck you, and how also maybe you could use that as an example to describe how did people react to you? Because they're probably used to journalists coming to see them, or photographers, but not photographers like you.
My kind of secret in my arsenal, when people say, how do you build those relationships? I have a very simple solution: food. You know, I remember years ago thinking to myself, well, when you meet somebody you're attracted to, ask them out for a meal. When you see family and friends, we meet at a restaurant. When we're celebrating, when we commiserate, we do it over food. And I thought, well, why do I do that with the people whose lives I document? So I have a simple rule: I won't photograph anyone if I haven't eaten with them first. So when I was in Rwanda about 6-7 years ago, I remember meeting this amazing woman called Olive. And when I met her, I often say there's a difference between a narrative and a story. A narrative is when somebody tells you the dates where things happened, the facts. But that's not their story. And Olive told me her narrative, and it was very, interesting, and we kind of shook hands afterwards. And as I was leaving, I realized the date that she'd given me for her birthday was the next day. So I came back the next day with a cake. And it turned out she'd never celebrated her birthday. She'd never once had a birthday cake, or even a day that was special. So she was in tears, and she still called some friends around. There was supposed to be a few beers came out, and we had a great party and a celebration of lights. And then at the end, she said, Giles, I want to tell you my story, man. And we sat down. I can't do justice to the full story. We actually have a video of it. You can hear the full story in the exhibition. But Olive had this remarkable story of survival, of resilience. But Olive's story was a moment again when I realized something very important. That's important in the Legacy of War Foundation, my organization, but I think important for all of us. Because we then set up a project called Land for Women, which is unique in that we set up cooperative farms. But what we do is we buy the land and we return to the women so they have the power and they tell us to leave at any time. So we constantly have to prove ourselves as an organization that their worth is their land. But what I realized in that moment with Olive, I'm this white guy from South London. I can't empower Olive. And I hear it again and again. People talk about we empower women in Africa, we empower this. And I thought, nobody empowered me when I was in Oslo. Nobody empowered me to walk again. What they did is they facilitated my self-empowerment. And that's when I realized, and that's what Olive taught me, that my job, and maybe our job, is to break down the barriers that stop people empowering themselves. And in Olive's situation, that was about land ownership and education.
Wow, what a beautiful story. And it also shows that you're much more than a portrait photographer, but truly a storyteller and also a chef. What's the Instagram handle?
The one-armed chef.
He is quite an amazing.
Actually, that came out of prejudice. And one of the things that I find a lot about all landmine survivors is the prejudice of rebuilding lives. And I discovered that I would go to restaurants and I'd sit there and my food would come out and it'd all be cut up. And I'd be like, why is my steak in little pieces? And at first I wouldn't say anything because you felt guilty because these people were being helpful. They were trying to be helpful. And so you feel I shouldn't say anything. And you'd be out on a date and nothing makes you feel emphasized more than that simply coming in with all your food cut up for you. So I decided in my own way, rather than say anything, I would start cooking. I'm pretty good, but I got a lot better. I set up this Instagram with the one-armed chef. And then when my food came cut out, I would just simply look at it and say, I can cook better than your chef. And then challenge the chefs to cook in their kitchen to prove that with one hand I could cook better than two hands, so why are they cutting my food out? So it was kind of a little, thing to challenge, but then it's grown and food is. I was saying food is my therapy. Because for me, food is the antithesis of war. I spend my life documenting conflicts. I spend most of my time in the field. And sometimes when I return back, I can be in quite a dark place, a difficult time. And then one day I thought about food. And I thought, well, war is about hatred. War is about destruction and breaking communities apart. And what is food? Food is how we bring people together. It's community, and it's how we show love.
What caused your injuries? Or what was an IED, an improvised explosive device? We see these devices and landmines littering fields that once, blossomed with the food that people would eat in Ukraine and in Gaza now. I mean, beyond this being incredibly treacherous, we heard from our colleague that you would DP. We cannot, and Jean-Pierre also said you cannot begin a peace process. You can't begin to relive your life unless you've first cleared these landmines.
The insidious nature of landmines and IEDs and, UXO is hard to say. One thing actually is never talked about, or hardly ever talked about, is also psychological harm. You know, I remember the first time I walked on grass after I was injured, and I was in the UK, but being absolutely terrified because the fact is, a landmine, you don't know it's there. I didn't know the one was there that I stepped on until it blew me up. Once that's happened, you start to look at every bit of ground, and you can't trust anything. And I think of children and communities living in those areas, and it's something that we don't talk about, but once somebody's been injured, they've seen a friend killed, how do they feel every single day living in that? I didn't have to go back and live in the place where I got blown up, but people do. And they have to live and walk to school in the same place where they saw their friend killed. And they have to do that every day. I don't know how that's possible. But getting back to the wider issue, I've seen it in countries, Mongolia, Cambodia, Laos, the legacy. And I must admit, we were talking about this earlier, that I never thought that I would see what we're seeing in the last decade. Probably started seeing it in Mosul and now Ukraine, Gaza, but the proliferation and the return of landmines and the return of active outlines on such an industrial scale. And we have a responsibility. I was in the area between Krematorsk and Bakhmut 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when it was particularly bad, and I was a bit shaken up, and I've seen so many landmines everywhere, and being laid just off the back trucks. I mean, just tons and tons of it. Anyway, I took a break, and I ended up in Verdun in France, the World War I battlefield. I'm one of the few people that thought that'd be a nice break. It walked around some World War I battlefields, switch off. But I say that half-heartedly. I'm interested in the legacy because everything is echoes of history, and we must learn from it. So what I discovered in Verdun was the Zone Rouge, an area the size of Paris, still so contaminated by unexploded ordnance from World War I that it can't be used. You can't even enter it. It's completely forbidden to enter an area the size of Paris in the middle of Europe because it is so contaminated by UXO. And a farmer was killed when I was there by what they call the Iron Harvest. And I went back to Ukraine after that, and it really hit me because I thought that farmer died from a war 100 years ago. And the moment of realization in Ukraine, I was thinking, if we don't deal with this problem here, there's a child not yet born that will die from this conflict. So what is the legacy that we want to give children, not just in Ukraine, but in every conflict area that is raging right now? If we don't clear it, a child not yet born would die because of a war that was happening when we were alive.
Giles, you've often used the phrase, we are often the story, referring to those who have disabilities, but we're rarely the storyteller. What do you mean by that?
You know, I think it's a really important thing. Recently the World Press Photo came out, which is an amazing award. And I look at that and I say how often people living with disabilities are stories. But then you think, how many people get to tell those stories who are living with disabilities? Hardly ever. And it's so important for me, storytelling coming from communities. One of the projects we did in Rwanda, I'm not allowed to take photographs there. We only work with local Rwandan photographers. So Alice recently did all these photos for us with Rwanda. It is so important for me that we democratize storytelling. And as I say, for somebody living with a disability, I struggle to know any other photographers in my situation. And I've had to fight my way to get to where I am. And I'm lucky because I had a career before that. When I see young photographers with disabilities, they simply don't get the opportunity. And so, yeah, for me, that is a really important, and it should be important for every marginalized community, to stand up and to say, we are often the story. Make us the storyteller. Let us tell our own stories.
I wonder if that's your goal for being a global advocate.
I mean, the global advocate is a very long title for start, the whole title. It's a title by committee, we know that.
Welcome to UN.
It's really hard that you put it anywhere. It's like, try to put it on your Instagram page and it fills the whole thing up. But, I was very honored to have that. But I am, as you said earlier, just a storyteller. Somebody once said that in a talk, they say, oh, you give voice to the voiceless. I said, no, I don't. They have voices. My job is simply to make those voices heard. And so I'm just here really as an amplifier. I'm just somebody, a mirror that reflects the stories that shares. So as an advocate, really my role, I remember once having an exhibition in the Parliament, House of Parliament in the UK, and it was of injured civilians in Afghanistan. And I remember the amount of times when I'm photographing somebody who telling their story, they would say, show this to your leaders. Show this to the people. Wesley tells you their story because they want something to happen. Not because they want to be in a magazine, and because they want to be on the cover of some newspaper. They believe it might help. And so when I got this role, for me, the advocacy was very simple. My job is simply to share the stories that I've been told, that it gives to me, to pass them on, in the hope that it'll make a difference. I remember somebody once came to an exhibition, they said, do you think you could change the world with your photographs? They were quite angry about it. It's like, well, calm down. A lot of them said, no, I don't think I can. But do I believe one of these stories can inspire the person that can change the world? Yes. And that's my role, and that's my role as advocate, is to come, to sit with you through exhibitions, and simply share souls.
How did you pick the stories and the subjects for this exhibition?
I mean, realist, I have Tash, who's from my team over there, who's been fantastic in helping curate this. But with all the stories, and everybody that I choose to document. I remember when I first started doing this work, I would go in the field and the local teams would give me a list of people that say, well, you're going to meet this person, this person, this person. And they used to call them injury lists, because it would be more a list of, oh, this person's lost an arm, this person has a facial injury, this person's, you know, we're like, yeah, but what's their story? They're like, no, but these are the people you should meet. So now I tend to turn up, I rip the piece of paper up. And everyone gets a bit upset. You know, they're like, well, we spent ages trying to find people for you. And I'm like, but these are just a list of injuries. Again, it's a bit like the food thing. I thought, friends, how did you choose friends? You don't turn up to school with a list of requirements and needs. You don't kind of start a new job thinking, oh, I want to make friends with people who have these type of, you know, attributes, whatever it is. It's instant. So I thought I should approach the same with stories. So all these stories, what I do is I get to the place, and I don't say, take me to the person with the worst thing happened, or this injury or that. I'll sit with the local teams, I'll say, okay, so who is the person with that kid that is a nightmare but always makes you laugh? And they're like, oh, this is family. And I'll be like, where's the place you go where they always quickly have the most amazing food? They're like, what's this sound? What's the family that you go home at night and it keeps you awake thinking, I wish I could do something more? And I can guarantee that list will be completely different from the list they first gave, because it's not a list of injuries, it's a list of stories. And so that's how I choose. And so all of these stories come from that.
Do you think the UN could be better at storytelling?
So, no, but what I was actually...
Honest.
No, what I was saying, and this is actually genuinely, I think the most important thing is storytelling is to share stories. And I do think the UN is too inward-looking in stories. I think we need to be sharing stories to people outside of the UN world, so they understand. I remember doing a talk a few years ago, and I get booked to do these corporate talks. I was in my car driving away, and to be honest, I always get booked to do talks with groups of people that agree with me. You know, be some company or with Saul, they'd be like, we want Giles to come and talk to us about the refugee crisis, the war in Ukraine, etc. Anyway, I'm driving, it's just before Christmas, and I look at the address, and it's an area of the UK that's known to be a little bit more to the right, shall we say, and that's odd. And then I got there, and it was a Christmas party for a big company of builders. I thought, strange choice. And I walk in, and the boss comes up to me, and he says, look, normally we get somebody to come, like a football player, or somebody who tells dirty jokes. Before, as he put it, the lads get drunk. He said, I've got a challenge for this year, on you go, and with me on stage. And I'm in this room, suddenly at 300 guys, there was one woman, and all sat there like this, looking at me, waiting to get drunk, and I'm supposed to entertain them before. I'm like, oh no. So I'm there. I'll be honest, I completely played out the voiceover of the thing about some of the risky stories and things like that, just to get them kind of interested. They're going, okay, this guy's quite tough, okay. But then, I told them stories, and actually it was stories that we had come of fathers crossing the Lesbos. Stories. I remember one story of a father whose daughter was so scared that he blindfolded her and tied her to him as they crossed the boat. And all these stories of fathers doing what they could to protect their families. And honestly, I don't think I've ever sat in a room where I suddenly men cry. And afterwards, they came up to me and they said a very simple thing. They said, I don't think I'll ever see those refugees as my family. And that's what I believe in the power of storytelling. I believe people genuinely are good. I have a burning house theory. And that is, even in this troubled time where everyone feels divided and there's so much hatred in the world, I genuinely believe, and maybe I'm an optimist, but I genuinely believe there's a house on fire. And somebody's walking down that street and they see somebody at the window screaming. They will not say, are you black, are you white, are you gay, are you straight, are you Muslim, are you Christian? They will try and save that person. And I believe 99.9% of people do that. So my job as a storyteller is to make sure that people see people fleeing conflict or caught up in war the same as if they looked up and they saw something in a burning house. And so I don't see it as their failure, but in my failure as telling stories.
Well, we put out a lot of statistics, and there is this saying that statistics are human beings with the tears dried off. So we aspire to tell stories, and you are a master, and I really appreciate you taking on this role on behalf of all of people who do not need to be empowered, but who need to be given the camera, perhaps the equipment, and the ingredients for a wonderful recipe. Thank you for telling the stories of people that you have met and telling your own story and sharing it. We have this amazing exhibit here for several days, and I wonder, what do you hope people will take away from it? You won't be here the whole time to tell your own stories first, but what do you hope they don't?
I think the key to all these stories is about communities supporting themselves, rebuilding themselves, and getting back to that word empowerment. And all these communities, through difficult times, are resilient. They try to empower themselves. And so what these stories are about is about how we break down the barriers to help us do that. That we don't need to be there saying what to do. We need there to support. So this is a story, they are stories of resilience. They're stories of localization, of communities. And hopefully they'll be reminders of how we should be helping and how we should be getting rid of landmines.
Yes. Very good. Well, thank you, Giles. You are an incredible inspiration.